And so pain is much more complex than we used to think. We used to think it was a simple interplay between the body giving information to the brain. But now we see that there's a relationship between the body, the neurological system, the brain, and even from ideas of pain, so from the cultural context. So this whole picture of pain is sometimes described as a biopsychosocial model. So if we unpack that a little bit, there are biological factors at play, so in other words, the body, psychological factors, so the mind, our understanding of pain and how we feel and think about it. And then there's the social context, so the environment, the ideas that exist in our culture around pain, the way that pain is perceived in society. And all of these come together to affect our experience of pain. So I'm going to outline now 3 key concepts within this biopsychosocial model of pain. And then we'll have a look at what these 3 concepts mean for us as yogis. And we can have a look at how we might want to teach according to this new model, our new understanding of pain. The first concept is that pain is not a signal originating from the body, from bodily tissues, but rather it's an output from the brain which interprets those signals. So the first concept, pain isn't from the body, it's actually an output from the brain. Secondly, the second concept, pain isn't an accurate measure of tissue damage within the body. So we might think often that the pain comes directly from the body, but because it comes from the pain, we now also realize that there might be other forms of pain, not just damage to, say, a ligament or a bone or a muscle. So we'll explore that more later. So sometimes we might have pain even when there is no tissue damage, or sometimes we might have no pain even when there is tissue damage, or sometimes the two might overlap. So something like an MRI scan is only part of that bigger picture, only part of the picture of whether there is pain or not, because it's not always related to tissue damage. So the third concept is that pain is mediated by the nervous system and then interpreted by the brain. And this means that the nervous system itself can become a viable target for the treatment of pain. So to summarize those in a succinct quote from Ramachandran and Blakesley, pain is an opinion on the organism's state of health rather than a mere reflexive response to an injury. There is no direct hotline from pain receptors to pain centers in the brain. We're going to start looking in more detail now at these 3 key concepts and see how they're relevant for us as yogis and as teachers. Pain is an output from the brain rather than a direct input from the body. So one thing we need to understand here is the role of nociceptors. So nociceptors refers to the body's pain receptors. So they're part of the nervous system, the neurological system. And these nociceptors are primed to look out for pain. They're having a look around, and then they could warn us if there might be pain and get us to respond appropriately so that we have a better chance of staying alive and being healthy. So the key thing to note is that the nociceptors respond to stimulus, but that stimulus is our perception of what's happened or what's happening. So in other words, if we believe that we've been bitten by a snake, the brain will interpret the signals in the body, the sensations of being touched on the leg, according to this idea of the snake. So we'll get a great big neurological outpouring of pain. But if we think that little touch on the leg was just us brushing by a stick, the brain will respond by brushing that off with that output of that's just a little scratch. We're not going to be in so much pain. And there's a very funny TED talk, I'll put the reference for it, which refers exactly to this by Laura Mosley, who's a pain scientist in Australia. And he has that exact experience. And so if we then think of this whole role of the nociceptors in terms of yoga teachers, we can see that if we use language that suggests that the body is inherently weak and vulnerable, at risk of failure or being hurt at any moment, then this information is perceived as a threat by the nervous system through that process, which is called nociception. So, for example, if we are teaching keep your knee safe by putting it over the ankle in warrior two pose, or if we're using words like engage the core to protect your back, we're suggesting that the body is inherently weak or at risk. And so those kind of cues, that kind of language is outdated. It's disproved by science that we need to be so cautionary in the body. So the nociceptors describe nerve endings, nerve cells, and they're acting as sensory receptors. They're perceiving any threat of pain that might be mechanical or from heat, thermal, or chemical, and then this information is going directly to the nervous system. And as I mentioned, they're picking up the threat of pain. So before any tissue damage has occurred, and whether or not it does go on to occur, the nervous system is being primed to feel pain. And that means that changes have already taken place in the body and in the mind. If we fear pain, we tend to pull in tighter and stiffen up, and our heart rate goes up. So it means that then if we do go on to feel pain, those signals will be even louder, or existing ailments might call out a little bit louder as well. So it means that essentially we're priming the nervous system to have the body actually feel weaker, and therefore we might be more prone to damage or more prone to injury and to sensations of pain. So I think from that first concept, it's really clear how this can be so relevant for us as yoga teachers, that we don't want to warn the students they're in imminent danger. And instead of that, we can use really affirmative language about this is really strengthening for your body, or feel how your body's enjoying this. And we can use this much more positive language around the yoga, around the asana, and around the postures, rather than waiting for the body on high alert for the crisis moment. And then when it comes, it's more likely to trigger a greater pain response. So yoga asana by itself is actually relatively gentle. There's not a great deal of force coming into the body. It's not like an impact sport generally. And so we know that the body is safe under those kind of loads. And again, this is something that's been shown by science and by a really good understanding of biomechanics. You'll come to those kind of conclusions also. The body's really well able to withstand the kind of forces placed upon it through movement in yoga asana. So we're going to come to the second concept now. And this is the idea that tissue damage doesn't equal pain, and pain doesn't equal tissue damage. So pain's not an accurate measure of tissue damage, of whether there is or isn't tissue damage. Pain, in fact, referring to that first concept again, is our brain's interpretation of how bad the situation is, how much pain we need to have, how much the brain is going to shout out pain, essentially. So we can see that there could be so many factors involved in this, what our expectations are, how our mental health is. We know that if we're more anxious or more depressed, we're more prone to feeling more pain. Or also, if the pain trigger, if we fall over and it reminds us of an embarrassing time before when we fell over, of some trauma or humiliation, then that will come with more associations which are more likely to trigger a pain response. So interestingly, the research around this is quite wide. There's been lots of examples. So for example, one study in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, looked at knees, and they found that of 29 participants who experienced pain, tissue damage could actually be seen in 89% of cases. So only 29 reported pain, but 89, when you looked, you could see tissue damage. But the ones who did experience pain, they were not all in that damaged tissue camp. In fact, those who had pain were almost as likely to have no visible damage to the knees. And similarly, when they've done research into back pain, they've discovered an absence of clear tissue damage, even when patients do suffer from pain. But also, they've seen that sometimes there is significant damage. So for example, pressure onto a nerve coming out from the side of the spinal disc. In people where there might be a total absence of pain, no experience of pain at all. So it's just not black and white at all. So as yoga teachers, obviously we're not there to diagnose anyone's pain. We're just using what information the student has asked or they tell us that their physio had. But it also means that since we can uncouple pain and tissue damage, we don't need to panic or to assume damage or to assume that we need to correct things, even if someone is in pain. Of course, we need to believe the pain. And of course, if someone goes into pain during a class or has an experience of sharp pain, like any sensible person, you'd encourage that person out of the pose, or the student will anyway come out of the pose. But it also means that sometimes for chronic conditions, so conditions that have lasted for a few months, 3 months, or that kind of thing, it's actually been shown that sometimes during gentle movement, pain will arise, but this isn't contributing to tissue damage. Sometimes movement is actually really beneficial, even if it gives rise to some stimulus which might be perceived as pain. And so we can think that that whole yoga process may have a role in a healing process, even if there is sometimes like a little bit of pain, a little bit of muted pain, let's say, coming perhaps from the body, from the nervous system, from the brain, from this complex picture. The last aspect of this is that because the pain can actually get caught in a sense within the nervous system itself, if it's not in the tissues, it's in the nervous system, then it means that the nervous system becomes a viable target for treatment of pain. So this concept, I think, is perhaps the most relevant for us as yoga teachers. So that's the third concept, that since the pain may actually become held within the nervous system itself, the nervous system can be treated. And so this third concept brings us really clearly into the role of yoga, because we know that yoga, in a sense, helps to modulate, mediate, transform our whole experience of the nervous system. And it does this in a lot of different ways. One way is that yoga practice, asana practice, alongside other aspects of yoga, not just the movement, also the breath, also the mindfulness, it can help to build a more resilient nervous system. And one way that this happens is, for example, if we're doing an asana practice and the heart rate goes up, say we're holding warrior 2 pose for a while, we're working quite hard, but at the same time, we're aware that we're in an easeful situation, we're aware that we feel safe and our breath feels gentle, then we're giving information to the nervous system that we're okay, even while the heart rate is elevated, and an elevated heart rate is associated with the sympathetic nervous system. So we're within a sympathetic nervous system state, often associated with fight or flight or stress, but we're staying calm within that system. So we're increasing our capacity to bear stress, to cope with stress. In another way, during that whole process, we might see during that warrior 2, we might be conscious that we're staying calm, we might be conscious of this raised heart rate. And so we're consciously aware that we're able to stay at ease in situations that are stressful, and we might then carry that out into our daily life. Other ways in which, of course, we know that yoga affects the nervous system is more directly by the use of breath work or pranayama, regulating the inhale and the exhale, and there's a lot of research around things like that as well. And we could also say, well, not all yoga practice is created equal, so we might have a really dynamic practice, and so that's more associated with an, if you like, stimulated nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system. So we might think that doesn't have so much to do with stress. And apart from that creation of more resilience that I mentioned, there's also benefits to come from strengthening the body. In a sense, yoga has its limitations in terms of creating strength long term, because in order to create strength, you need to be increasing the load. In other words, the weight being put onto the body, or increasing the amount of time under load, for example. And of course, in yoga asana, we're generally just using our own body weight. But nonetheless, of course, for someone new to yoga, starting to use the body weight workout, if you like, means that we'll be creating more strength in the body. And it's been proven scientifically that this can increase confidence in the body And this increased confidence in the body means the brain will interpret any pain signals from the nociceptors, those pain receptors, in a more muted way. It's going to not shout pain so much. And secondly, the other thing that's been shown is that an increase in strength relates to less injury, less damage to the tissues also. Thirdly, an increase in strength means more efficient movement patterns. And this is because the brain receives more information from the body. So the brain effectively makes a better map, if you like, of the body. It has a more better understanding of where the body is. Proprioception would be the term that we could use. And then on the other hand, if we move away from thinking of that dynamic kind of practice and we think of gentle practices like restorative yoga or even lying down for a yoga nidra relaxation practice, we know that this can help to redress imbalance in the nervous system. If we've been in a stress state, we'll have a relaxation response. And so this relaxation response also, it relates to reduced output from the brain, reduced signals, because as we're less stressed, the brain won't experience pain in the same way. Again, that pain response will be more muted. So the relaxation response through yoga helps us to relax more. It also helps us to sleep better. And again, reduced sleep is associated with increased pain levels. So this can be another way in which the yoga, if it supports the sleep, can support reduced experience or incidence of pain. So what's really interesting and also quite surprising is just how malleable, how adaptable those pain signals are and how readily the intensity of the pain signal changes. So the sensations and the feelings and the thoughts that coincide with pain are all very adaptable. This is a quote from a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky. The brain is not a mindless painometer, simply measuring units of ouchness. So another area that we could consider, of course, apart from very gentle movement or yoga nidra, is also mindfulness. So really being conscious of what thoughts arise and how we respond to those thoughts, putting some space between ourselves and our thoughts. And so using mindfulness is another way in which we can choose, in a sense, how we respond to pain instead of associating our full self with pain, with our headache or with whatever. We can kind of have a sense of that being a little bit separate from our whole experience of self. And so integrating mindfulness practices, as many of us do into our yoga teaching, is also a really useful way to deal with pain. And especially for those with long-term pain, it can help that pain to be experienced as being something more acceptable, more bearable. And again, within the whole environment, if you're teaching that kind of stuff together in a group, then the general understanding of pain together will change. So just to come then to the term of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity refers to the way in which the brain can adapt over time. And so when we first come to yoga and we're learning new movements, new thought patterns, new philosophies, our neuroplasticity, the way that our brain is adapting to accommodate all of this new neurological input, might be greater. And since we know that the nervous system can be a way of experiencing pain, that the pain in a sense can be contained within the nervous system itself, or that the nervous system can be a viable target for pain, then we can have a sense that adapting the nervous system through neuroplasticity, adapting the brain, is also a really useful way to help us to shift and to help us to move away from experience of pain if we've been in chronic pain. And so the brain adapts over time. So it may be that over time, the neuroplasticity, the adaptations get less. But of course, the wonderful thing about this massively diverse world of yoga is that we can continue to be creative and to adapt our practice. We can learn new poses, or we can approach old poses in new ways. We can notice new sensations. We could try practice with a different breath rhythm. There's so many different ways in which we can approach the practice. So in a sense, it means we get to stay really creative and have this joyful movement practice or really interesting breath practice, and know that this can continue to support both our mental health and our physical health. And this variety gives a really good opportunity for better body and brain connection. so that we can have so much fun with our sequencing also if we're teaching or practicing. So over time, we know that yoga can help to rewire the brain from this movement, but also through yoga philosophy, through ideas and through concepts, and even perhaps from moving away from a really strong identification with the body to a sense of being not just this physical body, but of being so much more than this physical body. So something really key to yoga philosophy. Tying all of that together into some sort of conclusion, hopefully you can see that this is really useful conceptual change around pain for ourselves and our students, for our lives, for our whole understanding of the body and the brain. And that we don't need to try and simplify pain. There's no reason to say, oh, this posture is creating this. And in fact, even if we want to sell something as being pain relief, it's important to, or pain relieving, like this pose or something, it's important not to oversimplify. It's been shown that no simple mechanical movement of the body can be directly related to, oh, this relieves pain. But in a much more broad sense, creating a really safe environment for ourselves and for our students, creating a space where community can thrive, all of these things will bear in on that sense of being able to alleviate pain in its more broad, complex, and endlessly fascinating way that we understand pain now. So this might be changes to breathing patterns, changes to the way that we move a little bit, to the social environment, to the philosophy. All of these factors can come in within this new model of pain. So I hope that's been helpful for you. Plenty of food for thought, most likely, this very complex, multi-layered realm of pain and what it is. So I'd love to see you again. I work at Bristol School of Yoga, and the Instagram there is at Bristol School of Yoga. And I also have my own Instagram page where I share movement practices and ideas at Laura Gilmore Yoga. I'll put all the references of everything that I've talked about here. Thank you so much for your time.